Uniting the Cults and History Flights Productions. It's The Hidden Faith, a truly independent investigation of the Baha'i faith and related cults that have failed to defeat it, like the Fatimiya Sufi order, whose leader, Wahid Azal, claims to be the return of Sufi Azal. The prophet who styled himself the Bab in 1844 created a spin-off of Islam called Babism, and then failed miserably when he was killed trying to overthrow Qahar Iran in 1850. Like Dale Husband said, couldn't he have picked someone cooler like Genghis Khan? He also said on our last episode that that should have been the end of it, but I'll get to that. Wahid certainly acts like Genghis Khan, but without class or ability to conquer anyone. You see, Wahid Azal retaliated against my journalism on his behavior with doxing, misgendering, false copyright strikes on my videos, and by calling me a, quote, Nazi pretending to be queer. Have you ever heard anything so stupid in your life? And hateful, too. When that didn't bully me, he filed a false and malicious anti-stalking order in the Domestic Violence Division of DC Superior Court. Yet I had evidence of transphobia, rabid hatred of Zionists or white liberal centrists, warping of post-colonial theory for anti-Semitism, and violent rhetoric like emptying a clip into, skull-fucking, and hanging Baha'is, which he has still never directly addressed, instead deciding to post a picture of an ass, which he is. I was married to a woman in that passive-aggressive cult for 6 years, but that is too far. I got up at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on March 27th, 2026, with a tight chest, sweaty palms, and dry throat from anxiety. I was reasonably confident I would prevail if there was a trial, but I cried in the shower because autistic rumination is a real bugbear.
Message from Dr. Wu.
Thanks to Dale Husband for waiting and being willing to potentially take off time from work to be a witness if there was a trial. I know this may seem like it was a waste of your time, my friend, and I get similar sentiments from people like me who had been summoned to jury duty in December 2022. When I was excited for that, actually. However, the court officer explained to us that day that having people stand by to be a jury was important leverage for the defendant to negotiate an agreeable settlement, which was the reason we were dismissed. So rest assured that your being on standby that day helped protect the interests of justice and the First Amendment. Once the hearing started around 10:30 a.m., for which I had to take off work for a total of 2 hours, fun, the judge mostly talked to Wahid Azal, who he mispronounced Wahid Azai. Wahid, for his part, kept interrupting the judge, stammering his way through his statement like a kid who didn't read the book for the book report, while trying to flip through his dozens and dozens of pages of worthless BS, flailing to argue stalking on what is so clearly an unfounded accusation of libel, when I had never threatened to kill him, threatened to destroy his physical property, threatened to show up at his house in Australia. It was all I could do to keep from bursting out laughing at the actual stupidity for multiple people in the hearing room on WebEx to witness, because there were many other cases being heard before and after us, as the judge firmly told this whiny old man to stop talking for once in his life. Welcome to the real world, buddy boy. Yes, we have another hearing on April 17th with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and so you childishly bray with a picture of an ass about it. But I expect them to decline to prosecute your other contempt motions due to the underlying TASO being dismissed for want of a claim. The nerve you have to waste the court's time like this. It also opens you up to criminal perjury charges, which I will make sure to refer to the attorney's office. Still, I fucking won! Again! Since I sent you legal notice by email yesterday as of the making of this video, today, Saturday, March 28th, is the final day to remove every single one of your doxing and defamatory posts before I start looking into civil actions. While, again, I will also file a motion with the court to refer you for criminal perjury for lying to the judge. You made my life a living hell for 3 months, Wahid! Now eat truth, justice, and and historical accuracy. So to de-stress after all that, over these past couple of days, I watched the documentary miniseries The Dinosaurs on Netflix in an awesome open mic night speech in DC's Brookland neighborhood, which unfortunately had no audio. Gave another speech at the Lincoln Memorial after a beautiful day seeing no cane signs and the cherry blossoms on the National Mall. And played a lot of Jurassic Park Operation Genesis, where you try to successfully run your own Jurassic Park. I think I figured out how to make it pretty successful. Add just enough value with animals, attractions, and etc. to justify raising prices incrementally. Capitalism for you. The TV show, meanwhile, did teach me that the Triassic ended in 1 million years of rain, which makes all my problems seem small by comparison. It's a little melodramatic compared to prehistoric planets, but that's what you get with Steven Spielberg as executive producer. They also seem to flatten genus of species, such as in the case of Stegosaurus, though I didn't realize they continued to exist through the Middle Cretaceous till today, and apparently only died off because plants started getting tougher to chew. And if I have to hear about the Dinosaurs Empire one more time, I'm gonna blaspheme God himself from Bruce Almighty, Morgan Freeman. I will say though, it ended with the coolest depiction of the asteroid impact and its aftermath I've seen. However, the documentary doesn't mention that even as T-Rex started out its reign as king of the dinosaurs 67 million years ago, the Deccan traps were erupting with a 500,000 year long pyroclastic flow that covered almost all of India, instead of reusing the hilarious planet-spanning ash cloud from Don't Look Up to cut corners. Also, it says non-avian dinosaurs died off in 2 weeks, which is dramatic license, since even given the shutdown of photosynthesis, that might not have been true, especially in colder areas where dinosaurs were already adapted to survive harsh conditions. Perhaps that could have been the case, but it could have taken as little as a year or 500,000 years. We just don't know. Still, the show was a great success as an entertaining intermediate documentary between Jurassic Park and Prehistoric Planet, and I know my little man will love it when I bring over the recordings upon visiting him and my baby bird in December. Stupid ice airport crap. Anyway, I also highly recommend this video called Terrible Lizards by Dead Sound in his Dinosauria series, which shows how our depictions of these amazing animals have evolved over time. I bring this show up mainly because ideas are like wild animals. They adapt to the modern world or face extinction. And Babism and its associated spin-off Bahaism, by offering and contributing nothing of actual substance to solving the world's problems other than flowery dialogue and ferocious, if suppressed, internal divisions, while impugning LGBTQ people, subjecting women to a faux equality, and strutting around with the same sense of superiority, though often much more passive-aggressively, as other Abrahamic religions, have proven they're the non-avian dinosaurs of religion, after liberal Christianity and non-belief outcompeted them for progressives in the global north, and conservative Christianity and Islam outcompeted them, often with unacceptably brute force such as in Iran or Africa, on conservatism in the southwest Asian and North African region. Contemporary critics within the Bayani dead clade walking, most notably Wahid Azal, have attempted to evolve by constructing a polemical framework designated as Akbarian Bayani to challenge the legitimacy of the Baha'i dispensation. This framework seeks to synthesize the mystical philosophy of Ibn Arabi, specifically the doctrine of the unity of being, Wadat al-Wuhud. I apologize for any butchery of Arabic words. With a selective letrist reading of the Bab's Bayan that he also used to logically argue against logic itself for some idiotic reason in Temples of the Pure Religion of Gnosis. The book he can afford to write with family support because he hasn't had to do any honest work a day in his life. The primary objective of this Akbarian Bayani synthesis is to frame the Baha'i transition as an ontological error, a rationalization that allegedly betrayed the esoteric and lecherous roots of the Babi movement. While I won't do a deep dive on this specifically, the Akbarian Bayani critique is grounded in several fundamental misconceptions. While I don't agree with the Baha'i faith's claims The claim that the Baha'i faith constitutes a rupture of the Bab's metaphysical system is refuted by the Bab's own internal eschatology, which explicitly subordinates the Bayan to the good pleasure of the subsequent manifestation, he whom God shall make manifest. Man Yuziruhula. Basically, he was the John the Baptist to Jesus Christ for the Christians in the back. Furthermore, the mystical hierarchies outlined in Baha'u'llah's Tablet of All Food demonstrate that the Baha'i revelation does not reject the Akbarian or Babi esoteric traditions, but rather refines and integrates them into a global ethical and administrative framework, or so it claims. The Babi movement emerged in 1844 in Quahar, Iran, initiated by Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, known as the Bab. The movement was not merely a spiritual revival, but a radical departure from the Islamic orbit, seeking to dismantle the existing socio-religious order through a new code of laws articulated in the Bayan. This text established a theocratic vision characterized by a dualism of intense ritualism and harsh regulations towards non-believers, often placing the entire non-Babi world into a realm of unbelief. So perhaps an administrative reframing, as Baha'u'llah did by shifting the focus from the unity of being, Wadat al-Wuhud, to the unity of manifestation, Wadat al-Zuhur, by allowing the faith to reframe the abrogation of Babi law as a fulfillment of the Bab's own internal eschatology, allowed it to survive the persecution Babi revolutionaries faced. After all, their violence failed and their prophet was killed, leading to reinterpretation of prophecy, as always happens when religion fails to deliver the goods, as I mentioned regarding Seventh-day Adventists in the last video. This repair, or tikkun, of the Babi rupture was achieved through a creation of a global ethical and administrative framework that emphasizes universal peace, the equality of religions, and social reform. On the other hand, this administrative framework has been critiqued as an instrument of centralized control, a Baha'i panopticon that monitors and suppresses internal dissent. Observers like Juan R. Cole and myself, D.C. Shepard, argue that the faith's leadership, specifically the Universal House of Justice, functions as a power cult that prioritizes institutional unity over intellectual honesty. The UHJ's claim to be freed from all error and its mandate of absolute obedience effectively forestall any democratic reform within the community. The Baha'i global framework is also critiqued for exclusion of marginalized groups, revealing a disconnect between its egalitarian rhetoric and its structural practices. Women are barred from serving on the UHJ, a restriction that is often hand-waved away with promises of future clarity. Furthermore, the faith's treatment of LGBTQ+ individuals, including the disenrollment of members for having the appearance of homosexuality, undermines its claim to be a blueprint for a unified modern human family. The administrative obsession with outward unity has led to the systematic shunning of covenant breakers, individuals who challenge the leadership's interpretation of the faith's covenant. This policy of ostracism, which often divides families, is used to prevent the contagion of dissenting ideas, creating a culture of conformity and self-censorship. The UHJ maintains its headquarters on Mount Carmel through a specific agreement with the Israeli government, which involves a ban on teaching Bahaism in Israel in exchange for the right to maintain its shrines and gardens. In episode 4, I noted the inconsistency in the Baha'i position. While the faith lobbies aggressively through international bodies like the UN for the human rights of its members in Iran, it remains silent on the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. This selective neutrality suggests that the global ethical framework is not a tool for universal justice, but a pragmatic administrative arrangement that helps no one in Israel or Gaza while securing the faith's institutional assets. Meanwhile, there has been a shift towards a corporate and PR-focused identity. High-profile members like actor Justin Baldoni and billionaire Steve Sarowitz are utilized to project a modern, spiritual image of the faith through media outlets like Wayfarer Studios. However, reports suggest that Sarowitz has used his massive wealth to bankroll legal and PR smear campaigns to protect Baldoni's reputation in his lawsuit with Blake Lively, which I'll go over on the next episode of The Hidden Faith in May. Using tactics that observers compare to other high-control religious organizations. The faith's financial structure, centered on the hukukullah, or right of God, a 19% tithe on surplus wealth, has also come under scrutiny. While the administration claims these funds are used for the well-being of humankind, critics point to the lack of financial transparency and the prioritization of elaborate, multi-million-dollar temple projects over direct humanitarian aid or social services like homes for the aged. which I went over in the Hidden Faith episode 3, unfortunately with Wahid Azal, but part of episode 7 will be a remake of that. Basically just trimming out all his bullcrap and only including my stuff, and then the podcast portion with Dale and possibly one other anti-Baldoni creator. This wealth obsession and focus on institutional grandeur further alienate the faith from its origins as a movement of the oppressed and downtrodden. Ultimately, both branches of the Babi legacy have reached their own form of intellectual extinction. The Bayanis are trapped in a reclusive past that they cannot modernize without resorting to syncretic fantasy, while the Baha'is are trapped in a bureaucratic present where their ethical principles are subordinated to administrative necessity and geopolitical pragmatism. The transition from the point of the Bayan to the order of Baha'u'llah has not produced a global ethical awakening, but has instead resulted in an administrative panopticon that helps no one except the institution itself. So it's time to take a deep dive into where it all began. I'll have the rest of this script linked separately, because I wrote it earlier and then had to hold off on making the video due to the legal bullcrap. The evolution of the Babi movement into its constituent Azali and Baha'i branches represents one of the most complex, fascinating, and contentious periods in modern Middle Eastern religious history. Central to this conflict are the scriptural mandates found within the Bayan, the primary doctrinal text revealed by Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, again known as the Bab. A significant point of modern contention involves the interpretation of the 13th gate of the 9th unity of the Bayan, passage that proponents of the Bayani faith, most notably Nima Hazini, who adopts the persona of Wahid Azal, cult leader of the tiny, insignificant, yet highly litigious Fatimiya Sufi order, cite as proof of the Bab's prohibition of book destruction. This report provides an exhaustive scholarly critique of the claims made in the recent post by Wahid Azal entitled Subi Azal on the 13th gate of the 9th unity of the Bayan, from Mutamim ul Bayan, the continuation of the Persian Bayan, translated and original Persian, specifically regarding the Mutamim al-Bayan and the preservation of scriptural integrity, while situating these claims within the broader context of Azali history, Baha'i counter-polemics, and independent academic research. I also apologize once again for any mistranslations or mispronunciations. I obviously do not speak Arabic and relied on machine translation. So, yeah, that will have to be the case. Sorry about that. I would love to get a guest from the ex-Baha'i subreddit who can speak and translate Arabic fluently. Otherwise, I'll need to go it alone and hope I don't butcher pronunciations too much again, so please forgive me. The Babi movement emerged in 1844 when the Bab claimed to be the gateway to the hidden Imam, eventually declaring himself the Qayyim and the herald of a new religious cycle. This declaration signaled a radical departure from the Islamic orbit, generating a charismatic cultural energy that sought to dismantle the existing socio-religious order of Khwajar Iran. The Qayyum al-Azma, the Bab's early proclamatory summons, established his authority, Walaya, as the center of all spiritual and political power, often blurring the lines between his identity and that of the divine. This theophanic ambiguity, or amphibole, was the hallmark of the Babi revelation, echoing deeper Shi'i and Sufi mystical traditions, but articulated with a consistency that the Bab described as Badi, or wondrously new. This sprung up around the same time as broad rational inquiry in religion in parallel with the Great Burning In the United States. As the movement progressed, the Bab revealed the Bayan, a comprehensive code of laws intended to govern a future Babi theocratic state. These laws were characterized by a dualism of intense ritualism and harsh regulations towards non-believers. The apparent tolerance found in some passages was often contradicted by mandates for the destruction of shrines, the striking of necks, and the universal slaughter of those who refused to believe. This developmental nature of the Babi Sharia culminated in the Haikal al-Din, which represented the Bab's final and most radicalized thoughts, effectively placing the entire non-Babi world into a realm of unbelief. Following the Bab's execution in 1850, the movement fractured. Mirza Yahya Nuri, known as Subi Azal, was appointed as the leader of the community, while his older half-brother, Baha'u'llah, initially acted in a supportive role. However, by the 1860s, Baha'u'llah claimed to be he whom God shall make manifest, the messianic figure foretold by the Bab, leading to a formal split. The Baha'is subsequently came to dominate the movement's legacy, while the Azalis, or Bayanis, became a reclusive and dwindling minority. The modern polemic presented by Wahid Azal focuses on Wahid 9, Bab 13 of the Bayan, which he claims serves as an absolute prohibition against the destruction of books. The specific Arabic phrase under scrutiny is Antum abadan kitaban la takrukun. Azal translates this as a command that under no circumstance a book or piece of writing ever be materially destroyed. However, a rigorous textual and comparative analysis suggests that this interpretation is both politically selective and linguistically ambiguous. The primary site of linguistic tension is the verb takrukun from the root khrq. Again, I do not speak Arabic, which can mean to tear, violate, or breach. A.L.M. Nicholas, one of the earliest Western scholars to translate the Arabic Bayan, rendered this passage as Ne déchirez amai la lettre de personnel. Again with the pronunciations. That's the last time I'm gonna apologize for that in this video. Never tear anyone's letter. This translation highlights that the word kitab in this context may refer to personal correspondence or specific legal documents, rather than the entirety of global literature. Furthermore, there is potential confusion in the manuscripts between takrukun, tearing, and tarukun, burning. While Wahid Azal insists on a universal reading, the context of the Bayan's other laws suggests that this specific gate was likely a protective measure for Babi writings or private communications, rather than a broad endorsement of bibliophilic pluralism. To fully undermine Azal's claim, one must examine Wahid 6, Bab 6 of the Persian Bayan, which explicitly commands the opposite. This gate states that it is obligatory to erase the books if they were not written in this order, referring specifically to the revealed books of previous dispensations. This mandate for the destruction of non-Babi books was a central feature of Babi theocratic vision, intended to cleanse the world of idle disputation and unbelieving sciences. The presence of these contradictory mandates suggests that the Bab's laws were stratified. While certain Bayanic writings were to be preserved with the utmost care, even to the point of potentially filling the Bab's house with diamonds and elixir, all other forms of knowledge were viewed as obsolete and dangerous. Azal's focus on a single gate, 9.13, while dismissing the explicit commands of 6.6, is a form of revisionist hermeneutics designed to sanitize the Babi image for a contemporary audience that values intellectual freedom, as well as his Marxist politics. Understanding the validity of the claims regarding the 13th gate requires an exhaustive review of the individual presenting them. Wahid Azal, born Nima Hazini in Tehran in 1971, has become notorious as the foremost public antagonist of the Baha'i faith on the internet. His career is marked by a transition from a Baha'i background to a self-proclaimed manifestation of God, a journey that has left him largely isolated from both the Baha'i administration and the traditional Azali community in Iran. Hazini's disillusionment began in the mid-1990s while he was a student of religious studies and philosophy at the University of New Mexico. He became a prominent voice on the Talisman email list, a forum for academic and liberal Baha'is to discuss sensitive historical and theological issues. Hazini's contributions were described as a torrent of fury, branding the Baha'i leadership as fascist and attacking sacred institutions like the will and testament of texts like the will and testament of Abdul Baha. By the late 1990s, Hazini had withdrawn from the Baha'i community and began a process of self-deification. In 2004, he legally changed his name to Wahid Azal and declared himself the return of Sufi Azal. This claim is viewed as theologically untenable by Baha'is, who believe in a 1,000-year gap between manifestations, and as a bizarre self-appointment by traditional Azalis. While Azal presents himself as an independent scholar, his work is frequently criticized for its agenda-driven approach and out-of-context translations. His interaction with the academic community has been fraught with conflict. In 2018, an article he submitted on the organizational hierarchy of the Babis was rejected during a peer review process. Azal responded with characteristic hostility, accusing the reviewers of astonishing intellectual dishonesty and ideological motivations. Scholars such as Dennis McEown and editors of research sites have warned against Azal's propagandistic hackery. His methods often involve character assassination, such as launching personal attacks against critics rather than addressing their arguments, deflection and circular reasoning, which means doubling down on claims such as Baha'i ordered murders without providing much direct evidence. And class warfare rhetoric, where he frames religious figures in modern political terms, such as comparing Baha'u'llah to techno-feudalists like Elon Musk. Though I don't necessarily disagree with this framing, it has its limits. The most damaging aspect of Azal's reputation is his history of violent rhetoric. He has publicly threatened to empty a clip in the direction of Baha'i internet administrators, and has sent explicit threatening messages to individuals who critique his videos. In one instance, he promised his skullfucker critic and, quote, make you moan into the Abha kingdom, which is the Baha'i afterlife, demonstrating a personality that critics describe as violent and authoritarian. This behavior is seen as a direct contradiction to the spiritual values he claims to represent, and aligns more with extremist religious movements than with scholarly or Gnostic pursuits. The post, under analysis, relies heavily on the authority of Sufi Azal and his continuation of the Bab's work, the Mutamim al-Bayan, or completion of the Bayan. The Bab had intended the Bayan to consist of 19 unities, Wahids, of 19 chapters each, but he only completed 9 unities and 10 chapters. He explicitly instructed Sufi Azal to complete the remaining 8 unwritten unities if he whom God shall make manifest did not appear in his day. Sufi Azal's appointment as the leader of the Babi community is documented in the will and testament of the Bab, where he is referred to as the Tamari Azal, the fruit of eternity. Baha'i apologetics later characterized this appointment as a protective measure for Baha'u'llah, but neutral 19th century observers and Azali sources viewed it as an unambiguous designation of succession. Sufi Azal produced the Mutamim al-Bayan, which extends the text to Wahid 11, Bab 9. Wahid Azal uses this text as a primary source for his so-called Bayani theology, claiming it clarifies the Bab's true intent. However, the Mutamim is viewed by many historians as a secondary text that reflects the specific sectarian anxieties of the Azali community during its exile in Baghdad and Cyprus. A critical point that undermines Wahid Azal's claim to authority is that the remaining Bayani community in Iran does not recognize him as a successor. Traditional Bayanis maintain that Sufi Azal left no will and testament, and that the leadership of the community has become a collective endeavor. They view the term Azali as a pejorative slur coined by Baha'is and reject Azal's self-proclaimed status as a radical departure from their reclusive and collective traditions. Furthermore, historical records show that most of Sufi Azal's own family eventually converted to other religions or ceased practicing. His son, Ridvan Ali, became a Christian under the name Constantine the Persian, and at Sufi Azal's funeral in 1912, no witnesses of the Bayan could be found to perform the ceremony, necessitating the involvement of Muslim clerics. This history of decline and fragmentation stands in stark contrast to Wahid Azal's claim of a vibrant prophetic restoration. The critique of Azal's post must also consider the Baha'i response to Babi law. The Baha'i narrative emphasizes that Baha'u'llah sharply distanced himself from the blood-stained practices of his predecessors. Which, again, cynical about the motivations there, definitely not divine, but I can understand from a practical standpoint, even if I really dislike the Baha'is. In the Kitabi Akdas, Baha'u'llah explicitly relieved his followers of the Babi ordinance concerning the destruction of books. He permitted the reading of all sciences that are profitable, rather than those that end in idle disputation. This abrogation is a cornerstone of the Baha'i claim to modernity and intellectual progress, used to contrast their dispensation of mercy with the decree of Bayan, which was the burning of books and papers, the destruction of shrines, and the universal slaughter of all save those who believed and were faithful. However, it's undermined by the fact that any Baha'i who writes a book has to undergo what is known as pre-publication review for doctrinal compliance. Critics of the Babi movement, including modern Unitarian Baha'is, often compare the Bab's vision to extremist groups like ISIS. This is a splinter group that the main branch, the Hyphen Baha'i faith, run by the Universal House of Justice, basically claims doesn't exist because there is no disunity allowed, but, well, huff, buddy. There are going to be divisions in any religion. People need denominations for these tiny or even large disputes, especially large disputes. Anyway, they point to the historical reality of the Babi revolts, meaning the Unitarian Baha'is, where followers fought desperately to establish a Babi theocracy. Eyewitness accounts from these episodes, such as the siege of Sheikh Tabarsi and the conflicts in Zanjan and Nairis, indicate that Babis did not refrain from burning villages or using lethal force against the Quahar army. Wahid Azal attempts to justify these actions by claiming the laws were only for a state that never existed, yet his opponents argue that the theocratic state envisioned by the Bab was characterized by wickedness and stupidity. Examples cited include the Bab's obsession with the number 19, Wahid, such as requiring Babis to write God's names in henna on their bodies after a bath, reciting 700 Bayanic verses daily, not keeping over 19 books, and many others. The Bab's obsession with the number 19 was clearly an expression of mental illness. He even foretold a time when even the pens on the pen case shall be arranged according to the number 19. Hence the moniker Wahid for a clearly unwell man, I suppose.
Welcome back.
The Hidden Faith podcast, specifically episode 3, Bahai's Baldoni-Faced Lies, featuring me and Wahid Azal, provided a platform for Azal to discuss his views to the deep regret of this author, which is why I'm again remaking it in May with Dale Husband and another anti-Baldoni creator, while again keeping in only the portions of the original video where I'm talking. This collaboration was a source of debate, characterized by high ideological tension externally and between the co-hosts due to Azal's later death threats and intimidating behavior towards others and me. Critics such as the Reddit user Bahamut19 argued that at the time that my evidence relied heavily on anonymous interviews, a source they deemed more suited to internet forums than to investigative or journalistic standards. However, I provided a thoroughly sourced bibliography for the episode, which was the most extensive I had ever produced at the time. I explicitly used this as a basis to argue against what they characterized, what I characterized as alarming cultic patterns in Baha'i doublespeak. A critical distinction must be made between my contributions and those of Wahid Azal. The most serious historical accusations in the episode, particularly the claim that Baha'u'llah ordered the murders of Azalis in Acre, were largely driven by Azal, with me focusing on the Baha'i faith's creepy behavior in the modern day, including in the context of Justin Baldoni's lawsuit against Blake Lively. Bahamut maintains that Azal doubled down on these murder claims while failing to provide direct, verifiable evidence, instead relying on out-of-context translations of historical sources. A significant dimension of the Hidden Faith controversy involves the mistaken dismissal of my gender identity by Bahamut19, and later my they, them, theirs pronouns by the transphobe Wahid Azal, who is clearly fluid about being mortal and God, but rigidly conflates sex with gender, while ignoring a trans person's preferred pronouns and claiming not to be transphobic. I identify as an out transgender person, and have noted that my use of a mask on camera is a specific safety measure to protect my privacy amidst concerns of surveillance by the federal government I work for, and identity-based risks such as transphobia. I also noted that my anonymous sources had different but parallel concerns of surveillance from the Baha'i administration, and I very carefully verified everything that they said. Bahamut19 characterized my shifts between husband, they, them, and she, they as an instrumental use of identity designed to create a perception of victimization. This was ignorant of the gradual nature of my gender identity journey through misinterpretation by Bahamut, for which he later apologized, so there's no hard feelings between us. However, this narrative of performed victimhood is directly undermined by the harassment I later received from my own podcast collaborator. Wahid Azal has repeatedly misgendered me, referring to me as a white male liberal idiot, he, she, they, it, and with genitalia-based insults. This is an attempt to intimidate me while ignoring my actual identity and never apologizing for it. This pattern of misgendering from both the Baha'i critic and the Azali claimant suggests that my concerns regarding personal safety and bullying were rooted in tangible experiences of identity-based erasure rather than a mere rhetorical strategy. Wahid's Fatimiya Sufi order is a group that many Sufis do not recognize. This movement is described by scholars as a new age syncretic esotericism, characterized by the use of hallucinogenic substances. Azal's claims to messianic authority have been derived from visionary sessions with ayahuasca. He asserts that the spirit intelligence of the tea appears to him as the mother, who he identifies with both the Persian Simorg and the divine form of Fatima. He claims to receive revelations from plants and believes that his visionary experiences have allowed him to move beyond Marxist ideology to a more Gnostic understanding of history that still heavily references Marxist philosophy, which is very diametrically opposed to Bayanism. Azal's worldview is also influenced by figures outside the traditional Islamic or Babi fold other than that. He has praised Aleister Crowley as a supernal genius and the greatest prophet of the age. He also draws from the works of Julius Evola, a right-wing esoteric author, from whom he derived the idea that even forged anti-Semitic texts, like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, contain a symbolic truth. This alignment with occultism and conspiracy theories undermines his claim to be the true guardian of the Babi tradition. Instead, it suggests a muddled political and religious view. He also needs to answer for the image that he recently posted, which I will not include in the video, but, well, it's very apparent, of the Iranian diaspora with a Star of David on the neck of an exaggerated image on the right of that, which is very anti-Semitic, probably generated with AI as well. The comparative study of the Baha'i and Bayani paths reveals a landscape of failed messianic teleologies. The Bayani movement represents the intellectual dead end of Babi thought. By clinging to a surreal and stagnant legalism, it has fragmented into idiosyncratic syncretism that lacks any coherent social or spiritual power. It is a movement defined by reclusive stagnation, where its only modern voice is a one-man war characterized by drug-fueled visions and online harassment. Conversely, the Baha'i faith has achieved global growth through a rationalized administrative framework that is effectively a power cult. Its claim of providing a global ethical framework is undermined by its selective neutrality in the face of genocide, its suppression of internal intellectual diversity, and its exclusion of women and LGBTQ+ individuals. The faith's administrative order is not the fulfillment of the Bab's wondrous word, but its replacement by a monolithic bureaucracy that prioritizes its tax-exempt status and corporate image over the unity of mankind it claims to foster. The primary reason to reject the claims made in Wahid Azal's various blog posts, proclaiming himself to be the return of God and the perfect man for this age, is the internal logical failure of his position. He claims to be the true successor of a tradition that he has simultaneously radicalized and syncretized beyond recognition. He uses Gate 913 to argue for book preservation while ignoring the explicit mandate for book destruction in Gate 66. He claims to be a Babi prophet, yet his visionary experiences with ayahuasca and his praise for occult figures like Crowley are fundamentally at odds with the 19th century Islamic and Babi context. He frames himself as a leader of the Bayani community, yet he is publicly disavowed by the very community in Iran that he claims to lead. He preaches a spiritual path while engaging in extreme online harassment and flailing in court like a little baby. In conclusion, Wahid Azal's interpretation of the 13th gate of the 9th unity is an idiosyncratic narrative designed to serve his own messianic ambitions while disregarding historical reality and scholarly consensus. It therefore represents the last roar of an intellectual dinosaur of one path of Bayanism, who refuses to adapt because he's never had to change his entitlement and arrogance for 53 years, but is about to be obliterated by the legal Deccan traps and asteroid for his criminal perjury and civil liability, as the Baha'i faith slowly faces its own extinction down the other.